Good afternoon, Jamaica. Good afternoon, New York. Through Ivy Jam. Good afternoon, Jamaica, through Bridge 99. This is Jamaica Live. I'm Bruce Golding. We are here every Monday between 12 and 2 to try to see if we can provoke your thought processes to get you thinking about important matters that are important to us as a country and as a people. Today is the 29th of May. We're almost halfway through 2023, and 2023 seemed to have started just the other day. And of course, by next week, we're going to be in the hurricane season, which lasts until the end of November. I saw something in the papers, where it was yesterday or this morning, warning us about El Nino. Well, El Nino. La Niña is friendly to us. El Nino is a bad boy that we have to watch out for. Although the forecasters have said that this year is expected to be a less intense hurricane season than normal. But even if it's less intense, it means that we'll have less hurricanes. But you only need one bad hurricane within the less hurricane framework to hit you, and you're in trouble. I hope to God we don't have that problem this year. God been good to us, I mean, the last major earthquake we had was in 1907. That's over 100 years ago. And look how many countries near and far away have had devastating earthquakes. Turkey's still trying to recover. Haiti is still trying to recover, although their earthquake was 13 years ago. We have to give thanks. Look how many hurricanes have come in the Caribbean, and they seem to be approaching Jamaica, and just when they are getting close, they suddenly just turn to the north. And we have been spared. So we give thanks for that. But as of now, we need to start preparing ourselves. So I'm going to talk about that some more on subsequent programs. But there are things that we can do to minimize the damage if we get a bad earthquake. If you have trees in your yard and they're full of limbs, the problem with that, is that when the hurricane breeze hit them, because they are so dense, have so many limbs, the breeze can't go through them, so the breeze blow them down on your house, mash up your house. So one of the things that we have to do is to trim out those trees to create some space, some passage for the breeze to pass through so that the tree doesn't come falling down. And then, of course, we have to look at our roofs and try and make sure that we secure them. But that's for another program. As I said, this is Jamaica Live. I'm Bruce Golding. We're here every Monday. We hail up all the people in New York. We hail up all the people back home in Jamaica. Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. The big talk over the last 2 weeks has been the salary increases granted to parliamentarians. It has caused many members of the public to get riled up. Some say that parliamentarians deserve to get a raise in their pay like anyone else, but that the level of increases that were announced is far too high. There are some others who insist that parliamentarians shouldn't get no increase at all. The public response is also driven by the fact that politicians are not the most well-liked people in town. public opinion polls have repeatedly given a low rating for politicians in terms of people's attitudes towards them. Salary increases for parliamentarians has always been an explosive issue. And the optics don't help, because it is a situation where politicians are deciding how much to pay themselves. It's not even like passing christening in picnic verse. It is more like a bishop anointing himself. It is because the issue of parliamentary salaries is such a thorny one that successive governments have tried to find a more arm's length way of dealing with it. In 1972, a committee of independent persons was appointed to make recommendations on the salaries that should be paid to parliamentarians. There have been 4 such committees over the last 50-odd years. There was the Leslie Ashenham Committee in 1972, the Ronald Sasso Committee in 1980, the Douglas Fletcher Committee in 1989, and the Oliver Clark Committee in 2003. Back in 1980, the Ronald Sasso Committee recommended that the salary of a cabinet minister should be set at $1 per week. That's $52 a year, more than that of the permanent secretary. The rationale for this was that since the permanent secretary is accountable to the cabinet minister, has to report to the cabinet minister for the administration of the ministry, the cabinet minister's salary should be nominally more than that of the permanent secretary. The salary of all the other political office holders, Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Members of Parliament, Minister of State, Leader of the Opposition, Speaker, all of the others, would then be calculated by fixed percentages above or below the salary of the cabinet minister. So what was proposed and what has been accepted over all these years is that once you set the cabinet minister's salary, then the prime minister would get a salary 25% higher than the cabinet minister. The deputy prime minister would get a salary 12.5% higher than the cabinet minister. The minister of finance would get a salary of 7.5% more than the other cabinet ministers. The leader of the opposition would get the same salary as the deputy prime minister, that is 12.5% above the cabinet minister's salary. And I've had a little to do with that. As also the speaker. The speaker would get the same salary as the cabinet minister. I mentioned those two, the leader of the opposition and the speaker, because when I was in office, the leader of the opposition got the same salary as a minister of state. And I felt, no, that was wrong. The leader of the opposition is the alternate leader of the country. If you have an election and the government lose, he's the person who becomes, or he or she is the person who becomes prime minister. And I felt that equating the leader of the opposition's salary to a minister of state was bad, was wrong. So I moved it up and I said the leader of the opposition must get the same salary as the deputy prime minister. I couldn't go further. I couldn't say he must get the same salary as the prime minister. The prime minister has to run the country. The leader of the opposition is hoping to run the country. So I said, equate the salary of the leader of the opposition with the deputy prime minister. And also, at that time, the Speaker of the House got the same salary as a Minister of State. And I said, no, that's not right. The Speaker of the House presides over Parliament. That's an important work. And so I made arrangements, insisted that the Speaker of the House should get the same salary as a Cabinet Minister. And then the Ministers of State now would get a salary 80% of the Cabinet Minister's salary. And the ordinary member of Parliament would get a salary calculated at 62% of what the Cabinet Ministers would get. That is the formula that has been used to determine adjustments to parliamentary salaries for more than 40 years, going back to the early 1980s. That is the formula that was used to set the salary scales that were announced 2 weeks ago. So what has caused this public outrage? You know, people were demonstrating last week down at Independence Park. The level of increases, that is what has caused the consternation. The increases granted to parliamentarians range from 167% in the case of ministers of state to as high as 193% in the case of cabinet ministers, the speaker, and the leader of the opposition. No, sorry, not the leader, the cabinet ministers and the speaker. But how did they arrive at these percentage increases? Since 2021, the government has undertaken a comprehensive review of compensation across the entire public sector. As a result, significant wage increases have been granted to public sector workers. Let me give you some examples of the level of increases that this public sector compensation review has produced. Take some large groups. Teachers. Teachers represent what? Over 20,000 teachers. That's about a quarter of the total public sector employment. Teachers got a raise of pay in the new classification, the new comprehensive salary review, ranging from 63% to 224%. Police federated ranks, that is the rank from corporal up to, sergeant? They got increases, or inspector, can't remember. But they got increases ranging from 133% to 175%. The higher ranks in the police force, that are the officers now, I think from inspector up to commissioner, they got increases ranging from 55% to 115%. Registered nurses, and I think all of us can agree, that registered nurses, that when you take into consideration the amount of work they do and the importance of that work, they've been underpaid. Well, registered nurses got increases ranging from 159% to 179%. And then there are the medical doctors. They got increases ranging from 170% to 214%. What about the permanent secretaries? Because that is where the salary of the cabinet ministers is pegged. And that is the figure from which the salaries of other political office holders are derived. Remember, the cabinet minister is supposed to get $1 per week, $52 a year, more than the permanent secretary. Well, you have two levels of permanent secretaries. One involves the cabinet secretary, the financial secretary, and I believe the auditor general is also in that category. That's the top of the line permanent secretaries. They got increases amounting to 147%. And then the other permanent secretaries, the regular permanent secretaries, they got increases amounting to 113%. I mentioned those two categories separately for a particular reason that I will explain. The salary of the cabinet secretary and the financial secretary has moved from, I'm going to bore you with some numbers, has moved from $7,418,988 to, as of 1st of April this year, $20,213,979. That's an increase, as I said, of 147%. That is the figure to which the cabinet minister's salary was pegged. So in order for the cabinet minister to earn $52 a year more than the permanent secretary, the salary of the cabinet minister was set at $20,214,031. That's $52 more than the cabinet secretary and financial secretary. That is the figure that was used to calculate above or below the salaries of the other political office holders. So based on that, the Prime Minister's salary moved from $9.2 million to $25.3 million as of April 1 this year. The Deputy Prime Minister moved from $8 million to $22.7 million. The Minister of Finance from $7.4 million to $21.7 million. The Cabinet Minister, remember he's now locked in with the Financial Secretary and the Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Minister moved from $6.9 million to $20.2 million. The Leader of the Opposition, remember as I told you, I made sure that the Leader of the Opposition would get the same salary as the Deputy Prime Minister. He moved from $8 million to $22.7 million. And the Speaker, who was now aligned to the salary of a Cabinet Minister, moved from $6.9 million to $20.2 million. The Minister of State would get less than the Cabinet Minister. So he or she moved from $6 million to $16.2 million. And then the ordinary member of Parliament, backbencher, opposition member, they moved from $4.3 million to $12.5 million. Now, in an article which was published in the Jamaica Observer last Friday, I suggested that since these new salaries were based on the same formula that has been used for the last 40 plus years to calculate parliamentary salaries, if the outcome is to be contested, it has to be done on one of two grounds. Either you're going to argue that the permanent secretaries are being paid too much, or you'll have to argue that the link between the permanent secretary's salary and the salary of the cabinet minister should be severed. I've not heard anybody argue that the new salaries for permanent secretaries are too high. And therefore, the contention must be that the cabinet ministers should not be receiving $52 a year more than the permanent secretaries. The cabinet minister should be receiving less. And if that is so, how much less? The president of the Joint Confederation of Trade Unions, Mrs. Helene Davis Whyte, who perhaps, in my view, has given the most thoughtful commentary on this issue. She has taken issue with the fact that the cabinet minister's salary has been pegged to that of the highest paid permanent secretary. You know, the cabinet secretary or the financial secretary. The opposition spokesman on finance, Mr. Julian Robinson, he also expressed that view. And both of them suggested that the cabinet minister's salary should be pegged somewhere in the middle of the permanent secretary's band. What difference would that have made? The salary of the permanent secretary, and those are the permanent secretaries other than the cabinet secretary and the financial secretary, moved from $7,418,988 to $17,430,562 as of April 1 this year. That's a 113% increase. Now let us see what difference that would have made if that was where the cabinet minister's salary was pegged. It means that the prime minister, instead of moving to 25.3 million, he would have settled out at 21.8 million. The deputy prime minister, instead of getting 22.7 million, he would get 19.6 million. The Minister of Finance, who is now to get 21.7 million, if that method was used, he would get only 18.7 million. The Cabinet Minister, who is now supposed to get 20.2 million, he would have to be satisfied with 17.4 million. The leader of the opposition, like the Deputy Prime Minister, instead of moving to 22.7 million, he would have moved to 19.6 million. The Speaker of the House would get the same as a Cabinet Minister, so that instead of moving to 20.2 million, she would have moved to 17.4 million. The Minister of State, instead of 16.2 million, would have ended up with 13.9 million. And the ordinary MP, who is now to get 12.5 million, would have had to hug up 10.8 million instead. So that the level of increase to the parliamentary group, if they had aligned the cabinet minister's salary to ordinary permanent secretaries rather than the top of the line permanent secretaries, would have got a lower level of increase. And you know, I listened to Mrs. Helene Davis Whyte, I listened to Julian Robinson, I did some number crunching on it myself, and I find that this suggestion is very persuasive. And although the horse has already gone through the gate, it is something that I believe the government should give serious consideration to. Would that have lessened the public anger and outrage? Oh, I doubt it. When the people vex because them road no fix and because cost of living a lick out them shopping lists, them can't find no work. Them blame it on the politicians and them feel so well them not forget no raise pay at all. I mean, that's the attitude of many people out there. But you know, is $21.8 million, which is the figure that the Prime Minister would get if we follow the suggestion of Mrs. Helene Davis Whyte and Julian Robinson. Is $21.8 million too much to pay the Prime Minister? Is that too big a salary for the Prime Minister? Is 17.4 million too much to pay a cabinet minister? Is $10.8 million too much for a member of parliament? You know, let's get serious. There are some hotel managers out there managing hotels with 200 or 300 rooms. They earn more than $21.8 million. And they're running one hotel. Then the Prime Minister, who is running a whole country. I mean, the hotel manager is supposed to walk past him and say, go away, boy, you're not going with nothing. What kind of rubbish that? Is $17.4 million too much to pay a cabinet minister? That is what many senior executives in the private sector are earning. And what about the MPs? If they were to get $10.8 million, that is less than what some branch managers of our commercial banks are being paid. The Prime Minister has appreciated the sensitivity of this matter. And that is why he has decided to remove the Prime Minister's post from the salary increases. But is that the right thing to do? You know, it is perfectly within the right of the Prime Minister and within his discretion to forego the increase. To say, well, I'm not going to accept the increase. And he can either send it back to the consolidated fund, or he can say, well, I want it donated to this charity and that charity and whatever. And that is what the leader of the opposition says that he's going to do. He's going to accept only 20% of the increase, and the other 80% he's going to donate to charities. But what the Prime Minister's decision has produced is a weird situation where the Prime Minister's salary will be less than half of the Cabinet Minister's salary. And it will be less than 3/4 of the salary of an ordinary member of Parliament. That is an anomaly that exists nowhere else in the world. You can't find any country where the Prime Minister is getting half of the salary that ministers get. And it is something that cannot be rationally explained or sustained. And though I believe his intentions were well-meaning, what the Prime Minister has done is to create a situation where either he himself or some future Prime Minister will eventually have to rectify this anomaly. There are some groups like the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce that have suggested that parliamentary salaries should be set by an independent panel. Well, you know, the truth of the matter is that we have had 4 such independent panels over the last 50 years. And the formula that we have been using for those 40-odd years is precisely what was recommended by one of these independent panels. It has a persuasive logic to it, linked as it is with what actually obtains in the private sector. What I think we should avoid is a situation where every so often some independent committee sets the salaries for parliamentarians. No matter how objective it tries to be, its decisions are almost certain to be regarded by some people as arbitrary and will more than likely cause as much outrage as is happening now. The advantage of the current formula is that it has a bearing. It is linked to a related position, so it has validity in its actuality. A different approach, which I have long advocated, is for parliamentary salaries to be adjusted based on the weighted average of adjustments to the salaries of other public sector workers. It will be difficult to quarrel with politicians who do for themselves no more than they have done for the other public sector workers over whose compensation they exercise control. There are 328 categories of public sector workers, and the level of wage increases which have been granted to them under the new public sector compensation review ranges from 34% to over 300%. Most of the 328 categories have seen increases ranging between 100% and 200%. I don't have the data to work out what the weighted average increase is because I don't have the numbers as to how many persons are employed in each category. But it would be hard for anybody to quarrel with that approach. The recently announced increases in parliamentary salaries, that's what we're talking about today. That's what's been kind of angsting up the people and causing a whole heap of complaints here in Jamaica, and I suspect in the diaspora as well. And that's what we want to delve in today. We want to delve deep into it when we come back. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We are on Irish Jam as well. Beauregard, are you there? Not there. All right, we'll link up with him later. We're talking about increases in parliamentary salaries, and my first guest, who I hope we have online, is someone who, like me, has served in Parliament. So he will bring a certain intimate knowledge of this subject to the discussions. He's the editor of the Western Mirror, the undisputed governor of Montego Bay, Lloyd B. Smith.
Yes, good afternoon, Bruce. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, man, I'm hearing you well. How you doing?
Give thanks, I'm alive and kicking.
Yeah, that's something to give thanks about. Tell me,
Yes.
the increase in parliamentary salaries, what's your take on it?
Well, it has been long in coming, but unfortunately, it was not handled properly.
When you say handled properly, what do you mean?
Well, I think there should have been some amount of public education to precede what was going to take place. Yes, some of us were aware of the overall restructuring of public sector employee salaries, which would ultimately affect the salaries of MPs and judges and other major public sector persons. But this entire affair was done almost outside of the view of John Public, and the average Jamaican out there would not have been sufficiently informed as to what was taking place. And so when the news dropped that there was this 200% or otherwise increase, it would have come as a shock to many, and it would have angered a large portion of the population who would have felt that it was too much at one go.
Well, you know, I've heard this figure of 200%. The truth of the matter is I'm going by the figures as effective as the 1st of April this year, and I'm looking at next year. Because I don't know if I don't know if the world is going to exist next year. But as of this year, it don't reach no 200%. But tell me, if I accept, let's again say that the way in which it was handled was less than what was appropriate and was sloppy. But isn't it true, Lloyd B, that if they got even $1 a month more, that there are people out there who would have ball and cuss?
Yes, absolutely. There's a high level of cynicism among John Public that, for one thing, the members of Parliament in particular, and by extension councillors, don't do much for their constituencies. They are for the most part lazy and uncaring and so on. Yes, there are some who do some work, but there's the overall perception, and I even see recently where the Prime Minister at some function honoring Edward Siaga was pointing to the fact that there's a large level of the population out there, especially among the young people, that politicians are corrupt. And that, and corruption would mean that they're helping themselves to the public purse and otherwise. And so why should they now be asking for more when in fact they're already getting their fingers already in the till, so to speak.
Well, I believe that some politicians are corrupt. In the same way that I believe that some parsons are corrupt. I mean, we see some of them being locked up for all kind of crimes. So, I mean,
Yes.
but when you look at the numbers, an MP is now to get $12.5 million a year as his salary. If I could try and dislodge myself from my modesty, I have served as a member of parliament, and I damn well feel that I am worth more than $12.5 million a year, and I suspect the same thing would apply to you.
Absolutely, yes.
So why are people complaining? I mean, if I went and offered my skills elsewhere, they couldn't start talking to me at $12.5 million. Do I have to talk to me about much higher than that?
Yes, Bruce, there's much merit in what you're saying, but the perception out there is that the politician is not deserving of any reasonable salary, because the perception is that, well, these persons are not performing, they're not doing what they are supposed to be doing, and hence the whole business of why there should be a performance-based criterion among the many other criteria that should be established where parliamentarians and councillors are concerned. We have heard, for example, the Prime Minister talking about job description and so on.
Yeah, we've been talking about it too long.
Yes. And this is why I go back to what I'm saying, that there has not been sufficient public education, because as you quite rightly said, I remember when I was a parliamentarian, what I was getting was really a subsidy. I mean, if I did not have other means of survival, I would have ended up in penury, because as you know, when you go there as a member of parliament, a little old lady comes up to you and says that she has not eaten all morning, her rent is not paid, she needs to go to the doctor, she has a prescription to be filled. Out of your humanitarian conscience, you're going to push, you may not necessarily push on your
but
pocket,
there are some
but
people,
you're going to point the person in a direction where that money is going to eventually come from you.
Yeah, but there are some people like those who write the editorials at the Gleaner, who say that what you have to do is you have to run her. You have to tell her, no, that is not my job. I'm not here to fill your prescription or pay your rent. I'm here to make representations on your behalf. Well, God help you if you try to get re-elected on that basis.
Yeah, that is topical. And why I say that, yes, in principle, that ought to be the case. But you and I know, Bruce, that we have engendered a political culture where the politician is seen as Mr. Boops, as we say in Jamaican parlance. And so everybody expects. I remember when I was elected and this woman came up to me and said, so, Mr. MP, what are you going to do for me now? You may vote for you now. Huh? Are you supposed to take care of me now until such time? And I stood there in amazement.
Yeah, but what people like the editorial writers don't understand is that the members of parliament end up having to shoulder a burden because the state is not able to make the provisions that people expect of it. It's not unreasonable to expect somebody who is poor and who needs medication in order to stay alive. It's not unreasonable for her to expect that some assistance will be provided. Now, the government does provide some assistance through the National Health Fund and so on, but not enough. And what happens is that these people end up at the MP's office because that's the only person that they have some kind of leverage over. Elections coming up and you want my vote, and therefore if you are to get my vote, look out the prescription for me. I can't blame them for doing that because the state is not able to do that. But people look at you and me and accuse us of having our snouts in the trough because we need to get hold of some funds to be able to assist these people. I remember when I was a member of parliament, one of the biggest problems I had was every week 2-3 people dead and them need assistance to bury them. Them relatives need assistance to bury them.
I must say,
Until I eventually started a program in my constituency where people would contribute a small amount each month to a pool of funds so that we could assist them with burials when that time came. And it was, it made a hell of a lot of difference to their lives. But I don't think people fully understand that.
No, and kudos to you, because I think you had something to do with the establishment of the constituency development.
Yes, because I felt it was necessary.
Right, and I can tell you, most MPs will tell you that's where they sometimes have to help people to bury people. Because when there's the expectation that everybody that dies in your constituency, the MP is expected to play a major role, not just attending the funeral service, but in fact contributing substantially to the burial financing and so on.
And then some of our people like to go pick out the most expensive coffin.
You better believe it. You better believe it. I remember one time when this person came to me and I said, don't you think, when she showed me the invoice from the funeral parlor, I said, why are you taking such an expensive coffin, and why haven't you considered cremation? And she tell me how properly.
No, them have to send off my mind in royal style.
In fine style. But Bruce, one of the suggestions I was trying to put forward is that yes, the MPs are underpaid, but I would have loved to see a kind of state-funded system that is developed, which would include, for example, ensuring that each parliamentarian has a member of parliament office, not one that is painted in green or orange, but is the member of parliament office where everybody can come regardless of his or her political persuasion.
Well,
that office should be properly funded. It should be staffed with a secretary, with computers, with all the necessary, so you have the necessary data, and you can have persons there who can point people, whether they should go to whichever state agency that can assist them,
that is
rather
something,
than just expecting the money to come out of the MP's pocket.
That's something that I had wanted to do, but because of the financial constraints, I wasn't able. It was part of the plan that included providing an office for the leader of the opposition, because I found when I was leader of the opposition, when I had to meet dignitaries from abroad, I had to meet them at the party headquarters, or I had to go rent a room at a hotel somewhere, and I said, no, that's not good enough. And that's how the office for the leader of the opposition was set up. And I'd wanted as well to make sure that every constituency had a government-funded constituency office that didn't have any green or orange flag hanging over it. So I wasn't able to do that. But
right, there it is.
what do you suggest to try and bring some closure to this parliamentary salaries issue? Should there be a rollback, and if so, how much? Because public education now, that is out of the way. Out of the way. That can't be done at this stage.
The horse has bolted. I would want to think that there should be a reduction of sorts. Maybe I would look at 100%, and then you do a gradual, incremental increase over a specific period of time, during which, of course, also I noticed that some of the other perks that members of parliament would have been entitled to, those have been now taken away as well. So what they are getting is just a salary, which would enable them to provide.
Well, that is part of what has caused the level of increase, because I believe that a lot of the allowances are now rolled into the salary. So it's not that it's an increase in net terms. It's just that instead of getting a salary plus a whole heap of allowances, they're getting a bigger salary with less allowances.
Yes, absolutely. Which is also applicable to the other civil servants in this new structural arrangement. But the fact, though, is that I think what is needed is more support systems for the MP, which doesn't necessarily mean that he he would have access to those funds, literally, being able to just write a check from it, or, but that there should be some sort of arrangement in order, as I said, when you have the office set up. Because sometimes, for example, a number of the welfare benefits, a number of the things that the MP has to push into his pocket to give people. There are government agencies out there that provide assistance for all of that. And so the part of the problem again is that the general public is not sufficiently educated. I find that apart from party faithfuls, right, who will know who to go to and where to go to, many citizens they don't know that there are several government agencies and several ways and means in which they can in fact be assisted outside of just going straight to the Member of Parliament and putting him under so much pressure. So I think that there needs to be a holistic approach to this whole thing as to the role of the Member of Parliament, as to how he or she functions within the wider context of government, and what are these various support systems that should be in place, inclusive of some form of public education and so on, so as to ensure that the public in general can be better served rather than just seeing the MP as Lord Almighty, full stop.
We have a lot of work to do. Lloyd B, thank you very much for coming on.
And thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, man.
Bruce, all the best to you. I see you have some work cut out for you.
Well, what can I tell you? Hope to see you soon.
Okay, take care. All the best.
We're talking about the increase in parliamentary salaries today. We don't need to take a break, do we? We can proceed. We have Wayne Chen on the line, do we? Wayne Chen is the president of the Caribbean Employers Federation, and he has a good mind when it comes to public issues. Wayne, are you there?
I'm here, Mr. Golding. How are you?
I'm good. This parliamentary salaries conundrum, as I said in a piece last week, I can't recall any occasion where there has been any significant increase in parliamentary salaries, however justified, that didn't end up with a lot of public anger and protests. This time is no different. But you, I'm sure, would have had a look at the numbers. What's your take on it?
Let me start by saying that I have long advocated for more realistic compensation for political representatives, more in line with the burden of responsibilities that they have and our expectations in terms of accountability. I think, firstly, the backlash, the anger, is not unsurprising. Even more unsurprising given the fact that the government did not spend much time in preparing the public for this. But when I posit it a different way, I mean, I'm out in the country, and people who are angry, and we sit down and I say, all right, let me flip it around. How much then do you think your local parish councillor or your local member of parliament ought to get? And then I'll put some figures out there. This is what the high school principal is currently getting. This is what the superintendent of police is currently getting. This is what the head of a local government agency is getting. This is what the local bank manager in the private sector is getting. When you show them that what the member of parliament's proposed salary is not out of line with what the principal of a big high school and less than what a branch manager in a bank is getting, they don't think it's unreasonable.
Well, as I pointed out, when I hear the Advocates Network, and I'm hoping to have Bobby Stevens on later on, when the Advocates Network says that this salary increases should be capped at 20%, that would put the Prime Minister's salary at the same level of an assistant commissioner of police, not a deputy commissioner.
Yeah.
An assistant commissioner of police. It would put the MP's salary at the same level of the principal of the lowest grade. There are 3 grades of secondary school, the lowest grade of secondary schools. I don't know whether people are taking all those things into account.
But this is what we have to take into account. You see, the percentage increase and the headlines and the heat has been generated by the percentage increase, not recognizing that Parliament, the salaries of, not just Parliament, because I include the parish councils and so on, of the political representatives, the political directorate, has long been a political hot potato that successive governments have shied away from. I recall you took a cut in salary back in 2009 in the midst of a global economic crisis to set an example. But I also recall going back, every time administrations have changed, and I go back to 1989, recalling ministers of government going back to private life destitute. We have kicked this can down the road for decades.
Well, you know,
and no government wants to take on the political heat of being realistic.
The proposed salary of the Prime Minister would have moved from 9 million to 25 million.
Yes, but
he has removed that now. He has taken that off the table. But I saw in the papers a couple of months ago a report. I don't know whether this was published in error, but it spoke about somebody at one of our big insurance companies who had retired.
Oh, yes.
His salary and retirement was $50 million.
Well, I can tell you that there was a similar article recently about the CEO of one of our big financial institutions, and his overall compensation package for the year would have been over $1 million.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you this, even within the public sector, recall the Prime Minister, even with his increase, will still be behind other public servants. He's significantly behind the Governor of the Bank of Jamaica.
Yes.
He's behind the head of the judiciary. He's behind the Governor General. He's behind the CEO of some of the big state corporations.
He's behind the executive chairman of the Port Authority.
Absolutely. So
I don't know.
Sense of scale in our discussion. But I'll tell you this.
But you know what disappoints me though?
Yes.
I can understand when the man on the street. I mean, I stopped to pick up petrol a couple of days ago, and a taxi man pulled up beside me and took me on and cussed me out properly because of the salary increases. And even though I tried to explain to him, I wasn't getting through to him. But what I find difficult to understand is when people who I think ought to be more thoughtful, ought to be more aware. I mean, Bobby Stevens is not a man without brain. It's a director of tourism. John Mahfood, who is head of the Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Them men not idiots. And they are saying, no, this is too high. You should stretch it out over a longer period of time. When we're expecting people to say, hey, I have commended Helene Davis Whyte and Julian Robinson because they made a suggestion which some people may disagree with, but they say, hey, they made a mistake when they aligned the cabinet minister to the highest paid permanent secretary, which is the financial secretary and the cabinet secretary. They should have found somewhere in the middle. And I gave some figures as to what that would mean. So that instead of getting $25 million, the Prime Minister would get 21. And the cabinet minister, instead of getting $20 million, would have got 17 million. And quite frankly, I mean, if I had that decision to make, I would say, let's go that way. Because I can argue that. I don't want to leave anything open where people can say, well, you peg yourself to the highest. Right? But
no, fully understood. And the fact is that the pegging mechanism and formula was well thought out and agreed on by both sides a long time ago. Because
it has survived 40 years.
This is the point. But we have to be, as I said, we have to be realistic. When you ask people to serve, and I know Mutty Perkins, as an example, would laugh and say the bane of the 20th century is a career politician. But when you ask people to serve, people with experience, people with competence, people with skills, to give up what they would in the private sector, and I can tell you, everyone I know has left a senior position in the private sector, whether as a professional or as an executive, has taken a financial loss. Even with the new scale, would have taken a significant cut to do public service.
Well, do you believe that any private sector company could employ Nigel Clark and offer him 20 million?
No, even at the increase thing, I can tell you, he's earning significantly.
Wait, I have to take a break. Can you stay with me?
Of course.
Yeah, okay, let's take a break. Welcome back to Jamaica Live. We're on Big Dad to Dad. We haven't spoken to Beauregard. Is he here? Not here. What happened to that boy? It's Jamaica Live. We're talking today about the recently announced Oh, I'm told that today's a bank holiday. So, board, Memorial Day, that's right. That's right. So, Beauregard is probably doing some enjoyable things. We're talking about parliamentary salaries, the recently announced increases. We have online Mr. Wayne Chen, but we are also being joined by Ms. Jeanette Calder, who is the executive director of the Jamaica Accountability Meetup portal. She's not on yet. Try and get her on for me. Wayne, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Where do we go with this matter?
No, you see, the government subbed it. I'll be blunt. The communication. I was surprised when the announcement was made without any build-up. You see, there's a lot of. Let me put it this way: one, misinformation, but also a general lack of knowledge about the role and responsibilities of our political representatives. Somebody cynically said to me, people who ought to know better say, well, the MPs only go to funerals. I heard your comments earlier. But the fact is that the MPs, the members of parliament's responsibilities, have cumulatively increased over the years. And the level of reporting, the annual integrity report and so on, the level of oversight and accountability has simultaneously also increased over the years.
Well,
one of the things that's not mentioned in this is that unlike the public servants, who I am now comparing them to, the public sector, they have no security of tenure. And when you leave the private sector to do political work, to do political representation,
you're not sure you can go back.
You're damaged goods.
Yeah. It's a good point to bring in Jeanette Calder, who I think is on the line now. Jeanette, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Golding.
Well, first of all, let me wish you happy birthday.
Thank you so much. I didn't see that coming.
Let me say also how thankful I am that you have allowed me to disrupt what should have been an enjoyable day.
No, this is my favorite thing to do. It's quite okay.
For me to come and provoke you. Huh?
That's all right. I am up for it.
But I really want to thank you.
No problem.
Jeanette, tell me, I've Wayne Chen on the line as well.
Hello, how are you doing, Mr. Chen?
Tell me,
Mr. Calder.
If we strip down from the way it has been handled and so on, if we look at the numbers, is it that the politicians are aggrandizing themselves, or is it just that we, the public, are just too mean-spirited?
Well, JAM's position from day one was simple. If we were to evaluate the decision taken by the government solely on the basis of, let's say, the length of time that has passed since the increase, the current cost of living, and the responsibilities placed on the parliamentarian and a cabinet member, mayor, and a councillor, I think we would have been satisfied with the decision. We were never, I don't think there's anything on record where JAM is making an issue of the amount. That was not our focus. So I caught some of what you said earlier. One of the reasons we do what we do, which is to create digital tools to increase accountability in Parliament and government, and one of the reasons we've been doing it for the 3 years is that our messaging has been we want to see value for the money that we are providing. So it's not a question of the amount as much as it is the performance and the productivity and the value for the money. That's where our focus has been.
And I think part of the flubbing too was that the accountability and performance monitoring arrangement that the Prime Minister spoke to last week, those really should have preceded the announcement about increases.
It should have, and it is a credibility issue that hasn't helped a narrative and a communication that most say hasn't been the best. I mean, you will recall that when Dr. Nigel Clark spoke to it the Tuesday, I know I listened to at least 5 interviews with Dr. Clark, several on radio, one on the television, and every single one of those interviews raised the issue of accountability. Nothing of what the Prime Minister shared a few days later came up. Now, if there's a ministry, to my mind, that has been and is still responsible for things like performance and setting the bar and circulars to deal with it, it's the Ministry of the Finance and the Public Service. So if there really is a ministry that is attending to the matter of the job descriptions, it would be that ministry. We heard nothing from that minister. By the time we heard from the Prime Minister on it, 2 things were of concern. One is the lack of the weight to the measures that were mentioned, and the other is the absence of the more weightier ones that the Prime Minister himself had promised us from 2015. So on those two counts, Mr. Golding, I felt that the Prime Minister came up short, and therefore, if he had delivered something that had met our expectations, I think Jamaica would have said, all right. But I think on those two grounds he fell short, and so we were still left with a country that is disgruntled, disenchanted, and dispirited.
But I can't disagree with anything you have said, Jeanette. But follow me now.
Let me.
For the last 40 years, we have operated on a formula that we haven't deviated from it. And the formula is that whatever the permanent secretary get, the minister must get $52 a year more. And once you determine how much a minister get, then you use that to determine how much a prime minister get and how much a MP get. Right. Now that we have used that over 40 years, no?
Right.
So as I said in an article last week, from we heard what the permanent secretary was getting, we could have just worked out the MP salaries on the back of an envelope, right? So why is it that, we're getting shouts from Jamaica Chamber of Commerce says, no, you have to spread it out over several years?
I think there are two reasons why. I think we have to be guided again by what we were promised in general, and also what the Prime Minister said, our chief policy maker. The impression I got, which he confirmed, is that we are really going through an overhauling, There are a number of things that have changed through this excellent idea in the Transformation Implementation Unit. The very word transformation tells me that we're not going to be doing things as usual. So we have the minister coming to the table, having set up this unit, and he's telling us about all the reports. I think there were like 3 reports, Sasso, Ashenheim, and Fletcher. 1972, one in 1972, I think it's as old as the Prime Minister. If I remember correctly, that's when Mr. Holness was born. Yes, 1989. No, I would be surprised if a committee looking at a matter which would take into things like what they were doing then, the economy, all manner of things, would come to the same conclusion as a committee today. I expect that we will be looking at the situation today. I think everybody understands that governance has changed in government in the last 40, 50 years. Our expectations as citizens have changed. So I'm expecting different rules, to be honest with you, Mr. Golding. I'm not expecting the same as the last 50. Now, the other problem is some things have changed, but some things have remained the same. And so Jamaicans are left with seeing some things happening in the public sector, having a Prime Minister tell us, and I'm going to quote, he said here, it was the most objective let me go a little further. The government directed the Transformation Implementation Unit to evaluate the job of a minister and an MP. This was a cabinet instruction to the Transformation Implementation Unit. We used a systematic, objective, scientific approach to do the job descriptions for MPs and ministers. And it is the most objective determination that was done in 50 years of determining how to pay parliamentarians. This is the last sentence. He says, the same tool that was used to assess the job of the public sector workers is the same tool that was used to assess the job of the ministers and the MPs. But what has happened is something very strange happens later. You explained it better than anybody has explained it to me so far this morning when you laid out all of it. But let us not miss the fact that permanent secretaries are placed on a scale. I am told none of them pass ranking number 4. But where are our parliamentarians? The same tool that is being used have placed our parliamentarians at what? The very end of the scale. Yeah. Now, what that means to me as a citizen is that the PS has to be evaluated every year. And she has to pass a certain threshold in order to move up an increment. It's going to take them about 7 years to reach where the parliamentarians are. So that is a difference that is bothersome to me. Yes. The parliamentarians,
that's the point that Helene Davis Whyte was making.
Exactly. And the parliamentarians, now, Mr. Golding, JAM's tools, one of them, the MP tracker, what does it tell us? For example, let me make it practical here. Let me take it out of the abstract. We have a cabinet member who left, we have a member of parliament who left the cabinet in 2018. The year after that, he attended the House 36% of the time. The year after that, 37%. The year after that, 39%. I'm waiting on the parliament to tell us how he did last year. Now, we are being asked to continue to not only pay a parliamentarian that's showing up less than half of the time. No Jamaican can do that in their job. But we're now being asked to double his salary. So therein lies the problem. There's no distinction being made because some are really doing good work in the House, some are really doing good work in the constituency, and some are not. But no distinction is being made, and we already have information to guide us. How did JAM get it? We ask it of the Parliament. Why didn't the government take those considerations into account as they do for the other public sectors? It's not the same tool. So we see the disparity, and we're not happy.
Wayne, what's your take on what Jeanette is saying?
Not unreasonable. Although I will, I've heard that argument before, and as I say, not at all unreasonable. We need to do an assessment of the accountability tools because there must be some performance matrix attached to the improvements, as it is for every other public servant. And I'll add this in theory.
But can I say this to you, Jeanette? I mean, I have what I consider, if I dispense with my modesty, I think I have a very agile mind, no? Mm-hmm. But I would not like to be asked to write the job description for a member of Parliament.
I would like to give it a try.
You're braver than I am.
I would say this though.
Yes.
For attendance, there are some straightforward things. Attendance at Parliament, attendance at parliamentary committees.
Yes.
Submission of particular reports, Integrity Commission and so on reports.
Yes.
Those should be part of the metric. Now, whether they attend every 9 nights and every christening, we leave the voters to do that. In fact, this talk about the accountability of our parliamentarians. Our parliamentarians have historically been far more accountable than many public servants. And that is just the reality of the land because they have to face the electorate.
But can I take that point, Wayne? Because people like I'm sure the late Oliver Clark, for example, would scoff at this business of attending every 9 nights and every funeral. I don't think there was a 9 night held in Northeast St. Anne that Shaini Robinson wasn't present at. And the people appreciated that, and they elected her every election with a higher majority. But now, ultimately, of course, it is the people who must pass the ultimate judgment, not some bureaucrat sitting in somewhere and using a chart to say how well you have performed. The people are going to determine that. Now, one idea that I have never subscribed to, which has surfaced again, is the question of the power of recall. Mm-hmm. I've never been in favor of it because I think it can easily be manipulated. I think that, you can, if you have enough money, you can get enough signatures to force a recall and put that candidate in a position where they have to go find a whole for money now to go run a election campaign to try and defend themselves. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that I would totally discard, no? But I'm just a little, I hear what Jeanette is saying and I cannot disagree with it.
And we already have that recall
my difficulty is when people seek to interpose themselves to determine whether or not an MP is performing well or not, when it is not them hire the MPs, the people in the constituency.
Well, the difficulty I have with that, though, Mr. Golding, is that though the people hire them, we have to have a mechanism by which they're selected, and I'm not trying to change the how. But I think there's also merit to the fact that once they are hired, it's not just the people in the constituency covering that salary. It's not just the people in the constituency that they're making policy and laws for. They become responsible for all of us.
Take a
and
point.
We're all contributing. So I feel like I need to have a say based on how you are representing me, though you are not my MP.
I take a point. I can't quarrel with that.
Which is why I say we divide the roles. The role as the representative and the role as the legislator. I mean, it's not a hard one, but we have to
That's it.
Have some public education around that.
I love
and
that.
And we have to have accountability around that.
I love that. And I'm, one of the reasons, Mr. Golding, why I was more than happy to put aside the birthday celebration is because in the relatively short period of time that you came in, I wanted a chance today to say to Jamaicans how much I appreciated the things that you did, which would have impacted parliamentary functioning, because I have a theory that I think after 60 years we should try it. We're trying one that's not working for us, so let's try another one. I believe that if we really get the members of parliament, notice them now, members of constituency, if they really were doing the work that I am now beginning to understand should take place in the parliament, after a period of time, we would need less and less and less of their contribution, if you understand what I'm meaning, in the constituency, the policies. The first time I engaged, for example, Senator Johnson Smith, she was senator at the time. I think it was around 2013. She had done some research and she was doing some work to address a real concern that was facing young ladies who get pregnant but were still in high school. That's impactful. That changes lives at every level. So if we really had good parliamentary work being done, policies, research, programs coming out, then you'll find that we can leave the councillors to handle the constituency and let our members of parliament deal with it from a space that is more sustainable than just the funeral. I saw you come up with, let me say this for you, Mr. Golding, one of the things that inspired JAMP, I have it right here in front of me, the terms of reference for the Public Accountability Inspectorate that you set up. You know why you set that thing up that nobody listening to know nothing about? You set it up because you wanted to see accountability. You wanted an entity to be able to follow up all those reports coming into Parliament, that the committee is not following it up. I looked at the terms of reference. I saw the difference they were already making in 4 years. I saw that they had disappeared, and I said, but why can't a citizen start to do this follow-up work that Mr. Golding had left this PAI at the Ministry of Finance to do? That is one of the reasons that JAMP was formed, increasing accountability. And guess what? In the 3 years of its existence, I saw what we would call top echelons in the public sector being held to account. The BOJ governor, the president of UTEC, the executive director of the Student Loan Bureau, all really held to account, not the pian-pian thing we're doing now, through that entity that you set up. I saw you put what? The government side had to step back and allow the opposition to chair those committees. What was that again? Oversight and monitoring. But we're not getting that. Last but not least, after Mr. Holness had removed the chairs as the opposition, put in the government, 1 year later, JAMP decided to take a look and see what has happened since. 294 reports went into the Parliament. One committee has sat. It did not make a difference. That's the kind of thing that we need to improve. The work of the Parliamentary and monitoring and providing the oversight of government. And then we will see a difference in the performance in the public sector. I believe that.
Wayne, your view?
Fully agree. We have to also acknowledge, and you see, this is where the communication has been weak. We are here 60 years since yesterday, the codification of what had been centuries of convention in the United Kingdom. It codified a Westminster system that also had a Whitehall as an integral part of it, a professional civil service. And that history ought to be written as to when did we damage the independence and professionalism of the civil service. I can understand why, because historically there were governments that felt it was too much of the old colonial and not moving with the new thrust of an independent country. But here we are 60 years later, and we need to assess. Much has happened in the 60 years, as Ms. Calder has pointed out. But we don't stop and assess and educate. The fact is that, as she says, the standard of governance and expectation is higher. The ability to communicate and get information out because of social media now. As Thomas Friedman would say, the world is flattened. Right. We don't have intermediaries anymore. People believe what they want to and they run off with misinformation oftentimes. Governments have to be very, very sensitive to this and understand that messaging, public education, accountability, the organs that there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. I recently chaired a town hall meeting based around the current constitutional discussion. And one of the points I'm going to emphasize over and over is that people come and they have the first opportunity in 60 years to have a direct say in significant matters that affect them. And the process is important. We can't sit here as old-timers and lament that fewer and fewer people are participating in the general elections every 5 years or so. And not involve them between general elections. We have to find mechanisms now to entrench democracy in this country. I fear for future generations. And you see the trends throughout the world with the rise in authoritarianism, the rise in strongman government.
Mm-hmm.
It's process that guards against these things.
Agreed. I just want to remind us, though, Mr. Golding, that there is a recall provision that has already been legislated in Jamaica, because the Local Governments Act has one for councillors. And so I do agree with you about that concern. That is no lie. But I want to say that if our legislators sat on it, pored over it, and took a decision, the idea that they would have considered it and left it solely at the local government level, but we're having such a difficulty continuing what you started in 2011 with the impeachment bill, it's problematic. It strikes up a little bit of, I don't know what the word for it is, but you can't have it legislated and that we can fire our mayor and our councillors, but we can't do it. And the other thing I'm happy that Mr. Chen mentioned is that JAMP has done 7 series on constitutional reform starting last year, February. We had several MPs involved, including the minister herself and her shadow. The cry has always been about accountability. We did focus groups to see what area would you like us to focus on. When I watched the one that Mr. Chen moderated, accountability. So for me, I'm wired to think of, okay, this is what has happened in the last week. People are not happy. But how can we take this situation and extract some good from it? It's the first time I hear Jamaicans talking so much about governance and engagement and how we make decisions in the House. So I think this has given at least JAMP an opportunity to say to folks, should the people we employ, which are our employees, be able to make this decision, be empowered to make this decision without us? We are the owners, the financiers, and the employers. And the answer is clearly no. So how do we now frame that around the constitutional reform discussion and make sure that the rules of engagement changes to balance the power between the people and those who govern us? That's where my head is.
Let me thank both of you. I'm out of time, but I want to thank both of you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You have embellished the discussion.
I am grateful.
And Jeanette, please have a wonderful rest of the day.
It's been good. Thank you, Mr. Golding. I will.
Have a glass for me.
I promise you. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much. Jeanette Calder, Executive Director of the Jamaica Accountability Meetup Portal, and Mr. Wayne Chen, a regular voice on this program and President of the Caribbean Employees Federation. In Jamaica Live, we're talking about salary increases today, the salary increases for parliamentarians. Do we continue or do we take a break? We continue? We're hoping to have Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte join us. She's the president of the Joint Confederation of Trade Unions. Mrs. Davis-Whyte, are you on?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Good.
I'm on.
Thank you so very much for joining me.
Yes, no problem.
I wanted to introduce you in a particular way. You would have been involved in very intimately in the public sector compensation review process. Now, you are aware, because I've heard you speak about it, you are aware of the linkage that was established 40 years ago between the permanent secretary's salary and that of the cabinet minister. And then all the other political office holders would pivot around the cabinet minister's salary. Is there something wrong with that indexation, do you feel, or you feel that it is appropriate?
Well, I think the indexation of the cabinet minister to the permanent secretary, I think, does have some merit to it. In that, in any ministry, the cabinet minister would be the policy maker, and there would be a direct relationship between the cabinet minister and the permanent secretary. And I think even with our new governance framework, it sort of almost cements that relationship now as well. So I think it has merit. As to whether, all others should be linked to the cabinet minister or how they should be linked to the cabinet minister, that may be something that, persons will want to question. But I essentially, in the political hierarchy, having determined the cabinet minister, then of course you would know that the quote-unquote ordinary parliamentarian would be somewhat below the cabinet minister, and others would be above. So it does have some merit to it. I think what has been the problem in recent times is exactly what was being discussed before. Because in the public sector, over the last 20, 30 years, there have been accountability frameworks introduced for public sector workers, including our permanent secretaries. And you do not see the same kind of accountability framework in place for parliamentarians. And I think what has happened over time is that, there has been now a lot of disquiet and persons being turned off the political process. And so as a result, it is now opening up for further discussion how you should remunerate your parliamentarian. Our thing is that we need to decide once and for all how we remunerate the parliamentarians, because it cannot be that it is a job that does not carry a salary to it, especially bearing in mind the responsibilities. But we have to decide how we remunerate the parliamentarians. It cannot be that every time there is to be an increase that comes up as a result of this link that was made, there's a hue and cry. So we have to decide how we remunerate them. Having decided, well, part of that decision has to be what kind of accountability systems can we put in place so that, members of the public, citizens can feel that, you're paying persons and you may be paying them reasonably well, because, some of the times when people hear of absolute figures and then they convert it to percentage, in percentage terms, when you actually compare with, how the skills in the public sector are valued as against how they are valued in the private sector, it's like cheese to chalk still. But at the end of the day, I think what is the real problem now is whether or not citizens feel that you are paying and getting the service at the same time.
Can you bear with me? I need to take a break. Can you stay with me a little longer?
All right, no problem.
Sure. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking today about the recently announced increases in parliamentary salaries. We have online with us Mrs. Helene Davis-Whyte. She's the president of the Joint Confederation of Trade Unions. Mrs. Davis-Whyte, are you there?
I'm back with you. Yes.
Yes. Tell me something. We're talking about a linkage before, and you expressed a particular, without disregarding in any way the importance that you have attached to, systems of accountability and performance assessment. When a permanent secretary is to be paid $20 billion a year, are we paying the permanent secretary too much?
Well, we can only come to that conclusion by examining what is happening in the general labor market, because the worth of a job depends on what is happening in the general labor market. So if the labor market is paying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for the job, you cannot expect to employ somebody in a similar role as the role of, say, a CEO in a private sector entity, and employ in a similar role in the public sector at less than half. And in essence, when we did the market survey, what it showed is that, permanent secretaries were being paid at the difference between $7 million and $40 million, thereabout, was the 30-odd million, the difference between 7 and 30-odd million in the private sector. I was speaking about median, not top of it, not top of the pile. Exactly.
Because I know certain private sector posts in Jamaica, private sector senior leadership posts, where the compensation package is close to $100 million.
Yes, and you're speaking about a permanent secretary who has a responsibility for that ministry's budget in the billions of dollars. who also has responsibility in terms of the delivery of the service for the wide citizenry of this country, as against, say, a private sector entity that may be, more narrow in scope.
Yes.
The job of a permanent secretary. I think what has happened is that, people have sort of gone into shock because there is this belief that this amount is too much. And that's some person's view. But as trade unionists, what we have to look at is the value of the job.
Yes.
And we have been saying, and I would think even from when you were Prime Minister, we have been saying that you have to set salaries in the public sector so that you can attract and retain talent. I mean, we have the situation in, say, your Ministry of Finance, where what we were told is you have 7 economist positions and only 2 could be filled at any one time because you can't recruit anybody for such a senior role.
And the truth of the matter is that for many years, the public sector has become the nursery, the training ground for the private sector. When I was a cabinet minister, the amount of poaching that used to go on. Every time I saw one of my senior officers buck them up at a restaurant, having lunch with some big private sector person, I said, him soon gone too.
Yes. Yeah, that is really what has happened. And I think Jamaicans have to also understand that in the 10, 15, almost 20 years of either wage restraints or wage freeze, the private sector has moved further and further away from the public sector. And that is something that we needed to be able to restore in some kind of way, because we still haven't restored it. But at least it is, now that the public sector is paid at just about middle of the market in relation to the private sector. And it's not just the permanent secretaries, we have to be clear. It is the entire public sector that once you did that market survey and you came out with the results, the entire public sector is being paid in accordance with about 50% of the market.
Well, one of the things, and I'm sure you will agree, one of the things that the public sector can't do is that you can't set the wages to suit the person who is taking the job, no? You have to do it in a sort of general way.
Yes.
Because when people are scoffing at ministers getting $20 million a year, who the hell could employ a Nigel Clark outside of government for $20 million a year? When I got Don Webby to leave Grace Kennedy and spend 2 years in the Ministry of Finance, and at that time he was being paid, I don't know, $4 million a year or something like that. You don't get a Don Webby for $4 million a year unless him have some real deep commitment in him.
Of course, because that would be like Trump change, as they would say. So, the truth of the matter is that we have to look seriously at how our public sector is paid. And of course, alongside that, we expect the usual thing about ensuring that there is effective service delivery, efficiency, productivity, all of those things go into the mix. This is one of the reasons why and a lot of people have not taken it on. Alongside this, the compensation review is a revamped performance management system, which we should finalize by the end of next year, and that will be in place to ensure that there are greater levels of productivity in the public sector, so that you're not just paying somebody as a body in a position, but you are going to be able to get out of them efficiency and effective service delivery.
The JCTU represents a large body of public sector workers. Has it been asked to? Has it been engaged in any way in working out the accountability measures for parliamentarians?
No, we have not been asked, but we have certainly raised it again coming out of this round of salary increases, because a lot of persons expressed concerns, and as we have said, you would almost expect it, knowing what was the relationship between a permanent secretary and a cabinet minister. But what we have indicated is that the government needs to ensure that some of these recommendations that have been made by various committees, that we really need to sit down and go through them. And I expect that when we next meet with the Ministry of Finance, that is an issue, because we did write them. Our real concern about how the increases were applied is that from the information we got, it appeared that the cabinet ministers were converted to the maximum of the permanent secretary scale, and we had a difficulty with that.
I noted that point you made, and quite frankly, I'm inclined to agree with you, and I actually worked out some numbers which I presented earlier in the program as to what the difference would have been if they had pegged them to somewhere in the mid-range.
Yes.
Because
I think, optics is important.
Yes.
So in the public sector, we had a lot of problems to settle on the conversion principle, because originally it was intended to convert everybody, regardless of whether you had 1 or 20-year service, to convert everybody to the minimum. And we eventually worked out the sliding scale. But in the sliding scale, nobody, unless there were problems with their conversion, could convert higher than 4th point of a 13-point scale. And when you actually place the parliamentarian at the cabinet minister at the 13th point in the scale, then what you're really doing is converting him to the maximum of the scale. And that would be something that's disadvantageous, we believe, to the public sector worker. Certainly wouldn't be equity, we believe, to do it that way. And so that was the major concern that we had. And as I indicated, we wrote to the minister, conveying our concern and expressing, our desire in terms of working through the conversion principle.
Well, I said
about accountability.
I said in an article on Friday that I think that idea should be revisited. Before you go, though, can you give me some idea why some anomalies emerge out of the exercise? No.
Yes.
Why is it appearing so difficult to resolve those?
I think this kind of exercise is really person specific. It's not the usual wage negotiations where you apply across the board to everybody the same thing. And so because you're going in and looking at what each job is valued, and because you have a public sector that's wide and varied, you found that, some positions came out higher than others, and there were instances where persons who supervised others were getting lower pay than the persons that they supervised. Clear anomaly that had to be fixed, but it is taking some time. And as I said, it's person specific. So you can't just go in and make a complaint about a wide problem. You have to get to each individual and convey that information for the Ministry of Finance, the parent ministry, as well as the transformation unit to do their checks and balances and come back with a fix, as long as it's identified to be an anomaly.
Is there any headway being made?
Not so far. We are actually at the point of we should be meeting on Wednesday, and we are hopeful that coming out of that meeting on Wednesday, there will be a plan in terms of how we would be able to get these things off as quickly as possible. I know some have already been dealt with, but others, in terms of appeals, some persons are just not happy with where they came out based on what they think is their responsibility, etc. So an appeals mechanism also has to be established, and we believe that coming out of this meeting on Wednesday, we should be further down the road in terms of, how we plan to deal with these anomalies, etc.
How big is the problem? I heard the Minister of Education saying that she had got a list of 10 individuals, but service-wide, how big is the problem?
Well, we have not actually gotten a large number as a confederation. That doesn't mean that there are not persons out there who may have cases, but as we say to them, you need to bring it. Even at the level of the leadership of the trade unions, we cannot see until it is actually implemented, and based on the implementation, you identify the problem. So we have encouraged persons to come forward, not just to sit and, complain about the fact that you are not satisfied with where you have come out vis-a-vis others. You need to bring it in so that we can actually present the data to the ministry so that they can do their checks and indicate to us what is the fix that they would apply. Because they have indicated, and I have actually brought things to attention so far, and I think other union reps, they have been dealing with them. But I think the major problem that we have now is a real angst is amongst our traveling officers.
I see.
That's about 25% or so of the workforce. And they are not happy because they don't feel that they have been given the kind of increase that others have gotten. And so that is still something that we are working through. So it presents a picture as if it's a whole, the majority of the public servants who have this difficulty. But really, the real problem is amongst our traveling officers primarily.
Is it true that the new salaries that have been put forward for the public sector, which in some categories may appear to be, staggering, but is it true that those numbers include allowances that they used to get, which they would no longer be getting?
By and large, but the major one is the upkeep for the traveling officers. But in other areas of the public sector, you would have other allowances that have been included. And as we have said, as unions, we are not philosophically opposed, because, if you take some of our traveling officers as an example, if any of them is to retire, you have situations where now they're traveling, well, before the review, their traveling would have been as high as 80% of their total compensation. Yeah. When those persons retire, they are retiring and they'll be collecting a pension on far less than they would have expected. So we don't have a philosophical problem, but we think that, something needs to be done, and that's one of the reasons why we're asking also for the tax threshold to be increased, because if you can lessen the tax, then people will probably see the benefit. But of course, we know that can be something that's just a number drawn out of a hat, because whatever taxes you give up, you have to make it up somewhere else.
Yeah. Mrs. Helene Davis Whyte, President of the Joint Confederation of Trade Unions. Thank you so much, Helene, for joining me today.
Okay, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Good. Thank you so much. We have online, we're not taking a break, we're going straight through now. We have online with us as well Mr. Robert Stevens, who is the representative of the Advocates Network. We have had him on here before talking about a different matter. Today we're talking about parliamentary salaries. Robert, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here. Good afternoon.
You've been trying to hold for fire about the wage increases. But when I look at the salaries that even ministers are getting, I don't know if anybody could employ Robert Stevens at that kind of money.
Well, I think the major problem is this, right? That you have convinced a lot of the public sector to accept a situation which is much less. And then a few weeks later, you come forward with a proposal which, as was just stated, is pegged to the top of the civil service. In other words, the highest paid of the permanent secretaries. And up to now, we still don't have any definitions of what the jobs and requirements and so on are for the jobs of politicians. And this has been promised over and over again. We have another promise from the Prime Minister that he's going to shortly release job descriptions and the ways in which people are assessed and so on and so forth. But almost every year we hear the same thing. And up to now, that hasn't been presented. Now,
but tell me, Robert, I want to be very clear in terms of the numbers. Because when I looked at the numbers, I don't have them before me right now, but when I looked at the numbers, the vast majority of the categories in the public sector are getting increases that range between 100 and 200%. There are some that are below, there are some that are above. So it's not fair to say that, people have been asked to take so much less.
Well,
I wanted to put to you, for example,
Yeah.
this formula that we have worked now for over 40 years, and we thought it was an appropriate fix. Where you say, well, all right, the minister is the number one person in the ministry, no? So he should really get something more than the permanent secretary. Give him $1 a week more. That was what the SASO committee recommended. And
Right.
you can argue as to whether $1 a week is really what it should be, but be that as it may. And then you fix the permanent secretaries at a certain rate as of April 1 this year. And when you move the cabinet minister now to $1 a week above that, there's a howl and scream. You have to be saying one of two things. Either you're saying that the permanent secretary shouldn't get that amount of money, or you're saying that the minister shouldn't get as much money as the permanent secretary.
No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that the way that it has been calculated is not the way that you just stated it.
But of
What
course it
has
is.
happened? No, it isn't. What has happened is that they have pegged the minister's salary to the highest peg on the permanent secretary's salary, right?
Robert,
And therefore-
Robert, you don't need to argue that point because I will concede that right away. I
Fine.
will concede that right away.
But
if you
showing-
had pegged it in the middle,
yeah,
the cabinet minister, instead of getting the $20.2 million that he's to get now, would have had to be satisfied with 17.4. But your advocate network are saying that they mustn't get more than 20% increase.
no, hold on. The fact is this, right? That when the whole thing came out first, what was said is that the majority of the public sector has been asked to accept 20%, maximum 30%. Okay? What is now coming out is that there are different rates that were calculated for different levels. But what we're saying is that it's totally unfair because it's continuing a situation where the upper end is getting a much higher increase than the lower end. And we're saying that what the result of this is that many of our nurses, many of our teachers are not going to quarrel and fight about it much longer. All they're going to do is change their
But Robert, that is not so, Robert.
well, I
The
guarantee you-
nurses are getting increases ranging from the low end, 159%, high end, 179%. The teachers, low end, 63%, high end, 224%. The doctors are getting increases from 170% to 214%.
Well,
I don't know
trust me.
where this figure of 20% come from.
Well,
There's
we
nobody
have,
getting 20%. The lowest category is 34% for a small category of workers, and I'm trying to find out why they are so low.
Why is it? We would like to know. Why is it that the politicians are being pegged at the nth, the highest degree?
You me tell you, so you don't need to argue that, because I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with
Well,
you.
so
I agree
why
with
aren't
Helene
they-
Davis
why
Whyte.
aren't they-
I
why
agree
aren't
with
they
Julian
even-
Robinson.
Why aren't they
You should
conceding
have
that?
pegged them in the middle. But if you had pegged them in the middle, the Prime Minister's salary, which was supposed to be 25 million, would have been 21 million. But even at 21 million, whole heap of people, perhaps including you, would have been balling same way.
Well, I'll be honest with you. The whole way it was presented was extremely poor. The way the whole thing was presented was extremely
If we
poor.
had pegged the permanent secretary, if we had pegged the minister to the middle band of the permanent secretary, a member of parliament, instead of getting 12.5 million, would have got 10.8 million. Now, who on God's earth can say that $10.8 million is too much money to pay an MP? You know what MP work is like? I did it for 30 odd years.
Well, yeah, but I still say that the way that the whole thing has been presented to the nation was done in a very, very backhanded way.
May I agree with you on that too. But you know,
Furthermore,
but
you should have come out.
But I can say to you, Robert, I don't like how you did that thing, But I'm not objecting to what you're doing. It's just that you went about it the wrong way.
No, but it came across as very arrogant, very high-handed, and it left a lot of people with a sour taste in their mouth, including us.
Well, you want me to give you a little joke?
Yeah.
Because of people like you, want to frighten the Prime Minister. Till the Prime Minister decide to back out the Prime Minister's position from any review. Now, poor me. My pension is tied to the Prime Minister's salary, right? I went and voluntarily, because I could have got the full pension, you know. But since I had initiated the law that the Prime Minister shouldn't get more than 2/3, but by that time I had been Prime Minister already, so I was entitled to the full pension. I went and I said, I am voluntarily accepting 2/3. And now because of people like Bobby Stevens, now the Prime Minister get freed and him back it out and my pension freeze.
Well, look.
So next time I see you at a restaurant, I go hand you the bill.
Well, no, but Bruce, seriously speaking,
Yeah.
the entire affair was very poorly handled. It was presented in a absolutely high-handed and very arrogant fashion.
I think,
and up to now, it has not been clarified.
I think what may have been presumed is that, look, we're not breaking any new ground. We're following the same formula that we have followed for the last 40 years.
The way it was presented was crass.
But in following that formula, you move the permanent secretary from $7 million a year to $20 million a year. So the minister moved with him.
No, well,
and I grant you the point that you shouldn't peg the minister to the very highest level of permanent secretary. Peg him in the middle, right? Because you have big permanent secretary and you have small permanent secretary. So peg him in the middle. But that being said, when I hear people on the radio, it's almost as if they say that, the Prime Minister's salary should stay at $9 million a year.
No, I don't think anybody is saying
who the devil in the private
not.
sector could employ a senior manager at $9 million a year?
We are not suggesting that it should go back to a point where everybody is paid what they were paid before. But the way that it came across was that you're giving 200 plus. I mean, look at even the Governor General. How can you justify moving the Governor General's pay from 12 million to 32 million?
My understanding is that it is because it is tied to the Chief Justice's salary. So what are you saying? The Chief Justice really feels salary too big?
Well, Paddy, that has not been explained anywhere.
Well, that's what I understand. I understand the Governor General's salary was linked to the Chief Justice. And therefore the Chief Justice is getting a certain amount. I don't know what's the relationship, who is above and who is below.
The whole thing has been presented in a very haphazard fashion where it was, what was said in Parliament.
Yes.
Okay. And how did it sound to anybody listening on the radio or on television? It was awful.
I don't think
as far as I'm concerned.
I don't think the government took sufficiently into account the fact that this matter has been explosive all the time. I remember in 2003, the ministers had been left behind. The ministers had been left behind when the permanent secretaries were going up. And when Mr. Patterson brought the thing now to bring the ministers back up, it required 103% increase. Them almost crucify him.
Well, let us see. There are several issues related.
Out of time. Be quick because I have to go now.
All right. The first thing is that up to now we still don't have the promised job descriptions and explanations of whatever it assess.
Agree with you.
And the other thing is that we need to put this in the Constitution and make sure that we have an agreed formula and we agree on the approach to do it. And don't make it be done politicians giving themselves their own increases.
Yeah.
Have the thing following some kind of pattern where it's an independent group.
Well, what we're following now was really from an independent group, namely the Sassa Committee endorsed by the Fletcher Committee. But I have to go. Thank you so much, Robert.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Network,
Advocates Network.
Thank you so very much. That's the end of the program for today. We hope to be back next week, Monday, new month. We start it all over again with another topic. Sorry we didn't get all of Beauregard today, but hail up all the people in New York anyhow. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll be back here next week. Monday. Have a good week, all of you.